The first hint that something was wrong came when my phone lit up with an emergency alert, a sound too sharp to ignore. The dispatcher's voice was clipped and urgent. My wife had been reported as an intruder on our own property. The absurdity hit me hard. She'd left only minutes earlier, heading to a meeting she'd double-checked her notes for twice before walking out the door. And now someone had used 911 as a weapon to try to have her physically removed. There was only one person in our community petty enough to pull this stunt: the self-appointed HOA enforcer who treated every rule as a personal weapon. What she didn't know was that the woman she was trying to throw out was on her way to meet with the state attorney general. If you've ever dealt with someone who mistakes power and authority, drop a comment below, because this story happens in neighborhoods just like yours. The morning started the way most Tuesday mornings did. 6:45 a.m. October air cool enough to need a jacket, but not cold enough to see your breath. I woke up 15 minutes before my wife, like I always did, made coffee, and listened to the birds outside the kitchen window. Fog hung low over the lawn, thin and pale, softening the edges of everything. It felt peaceful, the kind of peace you don't question, because questioning it means admitting it might not last. My wife came downstairs at 7, dressed in a gray suit I'd seen her wear maybe 3 times in the past year, always for meetings that mattered. She was carrying a navy blue folder, the kind with reinforced edges and a clasp that snapped shut with a decisive click. I'd learned not to ask too many questions about her work at the state level. She was careful about what she could say and what she couldn't. But I noticed things. The way she checked that folder twice before setting it down. The way she took a slow breath, held it, let it out through her nose like she was centering herself before testimony or a high-stakes briefing. "Important meeting?" I asked, pouring her coffee. She smiled, the small kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Very important," she said. And that was all. She kissed me on the cheek, picked up the folder, and walked out the door at 7:15. I stood at the window and watched her pull out of the subdivision, her brake lights disappearing around the corner where the oak trees formed a canopy over the road. Then I went back to my podcast about software architecture. Routine. Normal. At 7:30 I heard something outside. Not loud, just enough to pull my attention. A faint scraping sound, like someone walking on the gravel path that ran along the side of our house. I looked out the kitchen window and saw her, Marla Thorne, HOA president, standing just outside our front gate with a clipboard in her hands, looking at the house. She'd done this before, twice that I could remember, standing at our mailbox or near the property line with that same clipboard. She didn't wave, didn't acknowledge me through the glass, just stood there in the early light, backlit by the sun rising behind her, a dark silhouette against the fog. I didn't go outside, didn't open the door. I just stood there at the sink and looked back at her. 43 seconds passed. I counted. She wrote something on the clipboard, slow and deliberate, then turned and walked away. Her shoes crunched on the gravel. The sound faded. The morning felt slightly off now, like a note played just flat enough to notice but not quite wrong enough to stop the song. 12 minutes later, my phone rang. Not a normal ringtone. The emergency alert tone. Loud, insistent, designed to cut through anything. I grabbed it and saw the caller ID, 911 dispatcher. My stomach dropped. "This is Alden Voss," I said. The voice on the other end was professional, calm, but with an edge of urgency underneath. "Mr. Voss, we've received a report of an intruder at your address. Are you safe?" I blinked, stood there in my kitchen holding the phone, trying to process what I'd just heard. An intruder. "There's no one here. I'm the homeowner." The caller reported a person refusing to provide identification and unwilling to leave the property when requested. I closed my eyes. Marla. She'd called 911. About my wife. Or about me. Or about both of us. "I'm safe," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "But I think there's been a serious misunderstanding." The dispatcher paused. "An officer is already en route. ETA 4 minutes. The precinct was less than 2 miles away, and morning traffic on our side of the county was nearly non-existent." She hung up. I looked out the window again. Marla was at the end of the street now, standing with Corin Eldridge, another board member, the kind of person who nodded along with everything Marla said and never asked questions. They were both looking toward my house, waiting. The mild discomfort from earlier sharpened into something more concrete. She wasn't just observing anymore. She was orchestrating. I picked up my phone again and called my wife. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said, distracted, probably already in her car on the way to her meeting. "You need to know something," I said. "Marla just called 911. Silence on the other end. Then her voice came back, cooler, sharper. "Don't say anything to anyone. I'll handle this." She hung up before I could respond. I thought about the past 6 weeks. The notices Marla had sent, 11 of them. Lawn height was 3.2 inches when the rule was 3.0. Trash bin left outside at 6:05 p.m. when the cutoff was 6. A decorative wreath on the front door that she claimed exceeded the 18-inch diameter limit, even though I'd measured it myself, and it was 17.5. Every notice signed in her meticulous blue ink, everyone threatening fines if we didn't comply within 72 hours. I'd responded to each one. Polite emails citing the exact bylaw, attaching photos with timestamps showing compliance. She never replied, just sent more notices. It was a pattern I recognized from my work as an engineer. Systems designed to overwhelm. Inputs that exceeded outputs. Pressure was applied until something broke. Except I wasn't breaking. I was documenting. Every email saved. Every notice filed. Every interaction is logged with dates and times. I didn't know yet that those records would matter. I just knew I wasn't going to let her rewrite history. At 7:52, a patrol car pulled up in front of the house. Officer Lyra Denning stepped out. Young, professional, but with the kind of tired eyes that suggested this wasn't her first HOA-related call. She walked up to the door and knocked. I opened it, ID already in hand. "Mr. Voss," she asked. I nodded. "We received a call about an intruder. Can you verify your residence?" I handed her my driver's license, the property deed I'd printed and kept in a folder by the door for exactly this kind of situation, and a recent utility bill. She reviewed them, took notes, and glanced over my shoulder into the house. Everything calm, everything normal. "Is that the caller?" she asked, nodding toward the end of the street. I followed her gaze. Marla was still there, clipboard in hand, watching. "Yes," I said. "That's Marla Thorne, HOA president." Officer Denning let out a slow breath through her nose, the kind of sigh that said more than words could. She knew that name. "I'll speak with her," she said. "You're clear. Mr. Voss." She walked back to her car, and I watched through the window as she drove down to where Marla stood. They talked for maybe 2 minutes. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw Marla gesture with the clipboard, pointing back toward my house. Officer Denning shook her head, said something brief, then got back in her car and drove away. Marla didn't leave immediately. She stood at the end of the street, eyes fixed on my front door, with an intensity that made everything before it feel like a rehearsal. The clipboard hung at her side, but I knew she'd already written what she needed. The distance between us, 60 feet of asphalt and sidewalk, stopped mattering. It felt like she'd crossed it without moving, like she was standing in my living room now, studying the furniture, the photos on the mantel, the way light fell through the windows, memorizing the exact architecture of a space that was supposed to be mine. I knew it wasn't real. She was still at the end of the street, but my chest tightened anyway, and the walls around me felt thinner than they had 5 minutes ago. I closed the door, locked it. The house was quiet again. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Birds sang outside, but the air felt heavier now, like something had shifted in the foundation and nothing sat quite level anymore. I walked back to the kitchen and stared at the mug of coffee I'd made that morning. It had gone cold. I picked it up and poured it down the drain, watching the dark liquid spiral away. The morning was already gone. Officer Denning left at 8:15. I stood at the window and watched her taillights disappear around the corner, the same corner my wife had turned at an hour earlier. The subdivision was quiet again. A few neighbors were out walking dogs, checking mailboxes, pretending they hadn't noticed the patrol car parked in front of my house. I knew better. In a community this size, everyone noticed everything. That was part of the problem. I went to the kitchen table and pulled out the folder I'd been keeping since we moved in. Inside were 11 notices from Marla, each one printed on HOA letterhead, each one signed in blue ink with her tight, controlled handwriting. I spread them out in chronological order. 6 weeks of escalation laid bare. The first one had arrived 3 days after we moved in. Trash bin visible from the street after 6 p.m. Fine of $250, if not remedied within 72 hours. I'd brought the bin inside that same evening, replied with a photo time-stamped at 5:43 p.m. No response. Just another notice 2 weeks later. I picked up the one about the wreath. Decorative item on front door exceeds 18-inch diameter per HOA section 4.7.2. I'd measured it myself. 17.5 inches. Photo with tape measure in frame. Numbers clear. Timestamp visible. Sent it to Marla. Silence. Then, a week later, the lawn height was 3.2 inches when the acceptable range was 0 to 3.0. I'd hired a service specifically to avoid this. They came every Thursday, but Marla had a laser measure and apparently nothing better to do at 6:30 in the morning. I stared at the notices spread across the table. Everyone had a corresponding reply in my email folder. Every photo is backed up in triplicate. Dates, times, proof of compliance. I was an engineer. Systems were what I understood. And when someone tried to game one, I documented it. At 8:30 that evening, I walked over to Talia Breen's house. She lived 2 doors down, was a graphic designer who worked from home, and kept to herself most of the time. I'd seen her at the mailbox once or twice, always polite, always a little guarded. I knocked. She opened the door, and I saw the recognition in her eyes immediately. No surprise. Something closer to sympathy. "You got a notice from Marla today, didn't you?" she said. It wasn't really a question. She stepped aside and let me in. Her kitchen was warm, lived in, the kind of space that felt like someone actually used it. She put on water for tea and sat down across from me at a small wooden table. "She called 911 on me last year," Talia said, her voice flat, like she'd told this story before and the emotion had worn off. "I planted a rose bush in my front yard. Pink roses. She said it was an approved species. I showed her the approved plant list from the HOA website. Roses were on it. She said mine was the wrong shade of pink." I stared at her. "The wrong shade?" Talia nodded. "That's when it started. She called code enforcement. They came. Found nothing wrong. 2 weeks later, she called the county about my fence height. A month after that, the health department about supposed drainage issues. Then, fire safety concerns about my grill placement. Every agency she could think of. None of the complaints stuck, but I still had to let inspectors in, take time off work, defend myself to strangers standing in my living room." She got up and pulled a folder from a drawer. It was thicker than mine. She set it on the table between us and opened it. 27 notices, spanning 14 months. I didn't need to read them all. The sheer volume told the story. Marla didn't need the violations to be real. She just needed them to be relentless. "What did you do?" I asked. Talia wrapped her hands around her mug. I stopped fighting. It was easier to just comply, even when she was wrong, even when it cost me money, or time, or my sanity. I gave up. She looked at me with tired eyes. "You're not going to do that, are you?" It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "I'm not." I got home just after 9. My wife still wasn't back. Her meetings ran late sometimes, especially the important ones. I made dinner, ate alone, and cleaned up. At 9:15, my phone rang. The dispatcher again. My stomach sank before I even answered. "Mr. Voss, we have another report from Ms. Thorne regarding your address." I closed my eyes. "What is it this time? Suspicious activity. Lights on at unusual hours. Possible unauthorized occupancy." I felt the anger rise in my chest, but I kept my voice level. "I'm a software engineer. I work late. The lights in my own house are not suspicious activity." "I understand, sir. We're required to respond. An officer will conduct a welfare check." She hung up. 25 minutes later, Officer Denning was back at my door. She looked more tired than she had that morning. "Mr. Voss," she said, and I heard the apology in her tone before she said anything else. "I'm sorry. This is the second call tonight. If there's a third within 48 hours, it becomes a pattern. At that point, someone's getting a harassment report filed. Just depends on who makes the complaint first." I understood immediately. 2911 calls in one day. If she made it 3, Marla could claim I was the problem. creating disturbances, refusing to cooperate, making the neighborhood unsafe. The calls were baseless, but they were on record. And in a system like this, the narrative often mattered more than the truth. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. Officer Denning nodded and left. I closed the door and stood in the hallway. Marla had her clipboard and her calls and her version of events. I had timestamps and photos, and proof. The question was which one the system would believe when the time came. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on Thursday at the community center. I arrived at 6:50, early enough to choose a seat in the back row where I could see the entire room. 42 residents filed in over the next 10 minutes, more than I'd seen at any gathering since we moved in. Word had traveled. Everyone knew about the patrol cars. Everyone had theories. I could feel the glances, the whispers that stopped when I looked up. I didn't acknowledge any of it, just sat with my hands folded on the table in front of me. A printed copy of the HOA bylaws beside me, 7 colored tabs marking specific sections. Marla entered at 6:58. She walked straight to the front of the room, where a small podium had been set up, Corin Eldridge trailing behind her like a shadow. Marla set her clipboard on the podium, adjusted the microphone, and tapped it twice. The sound echoed through the room. She didn't look at me, didn't need to. Everyone else was doing it for her. At exactly 7, she lifted a wooden gavel from the table, one she'd bought herself because the HOA had never issued one, and struck it 3 times against the podium. The sound was louder than necessary, sharper. "This meeting is called to order," she said. The first 20 minutes were procedural, landscaping updates, pool maintenance schedules, budget line items read in a monotone that made half the room glaze over. I watched Marla the entire time, the way she controlled the microphone, the way she nodded to Corin, who took notes on everything she said, like it was scripture, the way she paused after each agenda item, waiting just long enough to make it clear no one else was allowed to speak unless she permitted it. This wasn't a meeting. It was a performance, and she was the only one with a script. Then she shifted to compliance issues. The room got quieter. "We have several residents who continue to disregard community standards," Marla began. She didn't say my name. Didn't need to. Her eyes flicked toward me for half a second, just long enough for everyone else to follow her gaze. "Repeated violations, failure to respond to official notices, and in one case, false reports were filed with law enforcement in an attempt to intimidate HOA leadership." I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't move, didn't react. She wanted a reaction. I wasn't going to give her one. "I've personally documented 11 violations from one household in the past 6 weeks," Marla continued. "This level of non-compliance threatens the integrity of our community and the property values we all depend on." She paused. Let that sink in. A few people shifted in their seats. "I'm proposing a financial penalty of $500 per unresolved violation, with the potential for a lien on the property if payment is not received within 30 days. Corin's hand went up immediately. "I second the motion." Marla nodded, satisfied. "All in favor?" I stood up. "Point of order." The room went silent. Marla's hand froze mid-gesture. She looked at me like I'd just interrupted a sermon. "This isn't the appropriate time for," she started. "Under Robert's Rules of Order," I said, my voice calm, even, "which this HOA claims to follow per bylaws, section 2.3. Any motion that imposes financial penalties on members requires 48 hours advance notice. Was this motion included in the meeting agenda, distributed to all members? 48 hours ago? No one answered. I didn't wait for one. I opened my copy of the bylaws to the first tabbed section. It wasn't, which means this motion is out of order and cannot be voted on tonight." Marla leaned forward into the microphone. "Mr. Voss, you're disrupting a duly convened— I'm citing the rules that you're supposed to enforce," I said. I flipped to another tab, holding the page up so the room could see the highlighted text. Section 8.4 states that any compliance violation must be supported by photographic evidence with a visible timestamp. Section 8.6 gives any accused resident the right to review that evidence before any penalty is proposed. I'm formally requesting to see the proof for all 11 violations you just cited, right now, in front of this assembly." A voice from the middle of the room spoke up. Gordon Ash, the neighbor I'd seen around but never spoken to directly. "He's right," Gordon said. "I checked the bylaws last month. Evidence has to be available for review." A ripple went through the room. A few heads nodded. Marla's face flushed. "Mr. Voss," she said, her voice rising, "your legalistic approach is exactly the kind of adversarial behavior that disrupts community harmony. We're trying to maintain standards here, and you're turning this into a courtroom. Asking to see evidence isn't adversarial," I said. "It's the minimum standard of fairness. If the violations exist, show the proof. If they don't, there's no basis for a $500 fine." Marla stood up straighter, gripping the edges of the podium. "You've been reported to local law enforcement twice in the past week for suspicious activity. That establishes a pattern this community has a right to address." "I was reported by you," I said. "Both times. And both times, the responding officers found nothing wrong. Filing false police reports to justify HOA penalties isn't maintaining standards. It's an abuse of process." There was a sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the second row. Talia. A few other people exchanged glances. The room shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Marla felt it too. Her knuckles whitened on the podium edge. She grabbed the gavel and struck it once, hard. "This meeting is adjourned. You can't adjourn without a vote," I said. But Marla was already stepping away from the podium, Corin scrambling to gather papers behind her. "Adjourned," she repeated, louder this time, and walked toward the exit. The room sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then people started standing, murmuring, gathering their things. A few residents glanced at me as they passed. Some looked curious. Some looked uncomfortable. No one said anything. Talia stopped at my row on her way out. "That was brave," she said quietly. "But she's not going to let this go." I nodded. I knew that already. Gordon Ash paused a few feet away. "Do you have copies of those bylaws?" he asked. I pulled a spare set from my folder and handed it to him. "Send me a digital copy too," he said. "I think a few of us need to read them." He walked out. I gathered my things slowly, giving the room time to clear. When I finally stepped outside into the parking lot, I saw her. Marla was standing beside her car, phone in hand, camera pointed directly at my license plate. She wasn't hiding it, wasn't pretending. She took 3 photos, deliberate and slow, then lowered the phone and looked straight at me. The clipboard was tucked under her arm, still there, still present. I got into my car and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, watching her in the rearview mirror. She didn't move, just stood there under the parking lot lights, staring back. I started the engine and pulled out. She stayed where she was until I turned the corner, and she disappeared from view. 3 days after the meeting, I came home to find 6 notices wedged into my front door, not delivered over the course of a week. All were dated the same day, all signed in Marla's blue ink. I pulled them out and read through them standing on the porch. Unapproved paint color on the front door. The door was gray, the same gray it had been when we bought the house. A color listed on the approved palette in the bylaws. Lawn irrigation runoff onto the sidewalk. We didn't have an irrigation system. Vehicle parked facing the wrong direction. I checked. My car was parked correctly. Exterior lighting exceeds the brightness limit. The only light on our exterior was the standard porch fixture that came with the house. Trash bin visible from the street on non-collection day. The bin was in the garage. Failure to attend the mandatory HOA meeting. I'd been there. She'd adjourned it early specifically to avoid talking to me. Each notice threatened a $250 fine if the alleged violation wasn't remedied within 72 hours. I did the math. $1,500 for infractions that either didn't exist or were fabricated. I took photos of everything. The gray door with the paint code visible on the receipt I still had from the previous owner. The empty side yard with no irrigation lines. My car is parked in the correct direction. The single porch light with its wattage clearly marked. The closed garage door with the bin invisible inside. The meeting sign-in sheet I'd photographed on my phone showed my name and timestamp. Then I went inside and added all 6 notices to the folder. 17 now, in less than 7 weeks. That evening, I installed cameras, 4 of them. Front door, driveway, backyard, side gate, 1080p resolution, night vision, motion detection, cloud backup. I didn't need a permit. It was my property. The cameras were small, black, unobtrusive, mounted under the eaves, where they had clean sight lines but didn't dominate the architecture. The installation took 3 hours. By 9 p.m., I had a live feed on my phone and my computer. Every angle of the house covered. Every approach is recorded. 2 days later, another notice arrived. Unapproved security cameras violate community aesthetics per Section 5.2. I pulled up the bylaws on my laptop and navigated to Section 5.2. The section dealt with satellite dishes and external antennas. It said nothing about security cameras. I replied to Marla's email with a screenshot of the section, the relevant text highlighted, and a photo of the cameras showing their minimal visual profile. No response. But the next morning at 6:47, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the camera app. Marla was standing at the end of my driveway, holding her own camera, zooming in on my cameras, recording the recordings. I took a screenshot, added it to the folder. 4 days after that, a county code enforcement inspector showed up. His name was Bryce Halden, early 50s, carrying a clipboard that looked as worn out as he did. "Mr. Voss," he said when I opened the door, "we've received multiple complaints about code violations at this address. I'm required to inspect." "Multiple complaints from who?" I asked. He shook his head. "I can't disclose the source, but I need to check your property." I let him in, walked him through every room, showed him the electrical panel, the plumbing, the HVAC system, and the foundation. He spent 45 minutes taking notes, checking code books on his phone, and measuring clearances. When he finished, he looked tired. "No violations," he said. "Everything's up to code. Can I ask what the complaints were about?" He glanced at his notes. "Structural modifications without permits, unpermitted electrical work, potential zoning violation for home business use." I stared at him. "We haven't modified anything. I'm a software engineer. I work from home, but I don't run a business out of the house. This is harassment." Bryce sighed. "I can't speak to intent. Mr. Voss, I just inspect what I'm told to inspect. But for what it's worth, document everything. Dates, times, who came, what they found. It might matter later." He left. I added his report to the folder. 3 days later, the fire department came. Complaint about blocked egress routes, unfounded. 5 days after that, the health department. Alleged unsanitary conditions, unfounded. A week later, the county planning and zoning. Possible unpermitted addition to the structure, unfounded. Every inspection took hours. Every inspector was apologetic. Every complaint came from an anonymous source that I knew wasn't anonymous at all. Marla was cycling through every county and municipal agency she could think of, using government resources as her personal harassment tool. And every time an inspector left, I updated my spreadsheet. Date, agency, complaint type, inspector name, result, patterns documented, evidence collected. I started checking the camera footage every morning. It became a routine. 6 a.m., coffee in hand, scroll through the overnight motion alerts. Marla appeared on screen 6 days out of 7, always between 6:30 and 7 a.m., always with the clipboard. Sometimes she stood at the property line and wrote. Sometimes she photographed the house from different angles. Once she measured the distance from my mailbox to the curb with a tape measure. I didn't confront her, didn't go outside, just saved every clip to an external hard drive with timestamps and GPS coordinates embedded in the metadata. Talia texted me one afternoon. "She's asking neighbors about you, trying to find someone who'll complain." I wasn't surprised. Gordon called that evening. I reviewed the bylaws. She violated procedure 14 times in the last meeting alone. "Do you want to file a formal complaint against the board?" I thought about it, but filing internally meant going through a system Marla controlled. It would go nowhere. I needed something external, something with actual authority. I started researching HOA oversight at the state level. Found that the Attorney General's office had jurisdiction over abuse and misconduct. Found the complaint forms. Started filling them out. That night at dinner, I asked my wife a question I'd been holding for days. "Do you know if the state AG's office handles HOA complaints?" She stopped eating, looked at me across the table with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Why are you asking?" I explained. The notices, the inspectors, the cameras, the pattern that was building towards something I couldn't see yet but knew was there. I'm thinking about filing a formal complaint, I said. Marla's violated multiple state statutes, harassment, false reporting, abuse of process. If I document it correctly, maybe someone with actual authority will pay attention. My wife set down her fork. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You don't need to file." I looked at her. "Why not?" "Because I already did. Yesterday." I blinked. "You filed a complaint with the AG's office?" She nodded slowly. "Not exactly. I didn't file it with the AG's office. I filed it through the AG's office. Because I work there. I'm the Deputy Director of the Civil Rights Enforcement Division." The room went very still. "You're what?" "Deputy Director," she said again. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it now. Something sharp. "And that meeting I went to last week, the one Marla called 911 about, that was with the Attorney General. We were discussing expanding our jurisdiction to cover systemic HOA abuse cases. Your documentation, everything you've been collecting. I've been reviewing it for weeks. It's airtight. And as of yesterday, this HOA is under formal state investigation." I sat back in my chair. My mind was trying to catch up. Marla doesn't know this. "Not yet," my wife said. "But she will. Soon." The motion alert woke me at 2:34 a.m. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up the dark bedroom with a harsh blue glow. I grabbed it and opened the camera app, expecting to see a raccoon or a cat crossing the driveway. Instead, I saw Marla. She was standing at the side gate, holding something metallic that caught the infrared light from the camera. Not a clipboard this time. A tool. Small bolt cutters. I sat up, nudged my wife awake. "You need to see this," I whispered. We watched together on the tablet. Marla worked the bolt cutters against the gate latch for maybe 20 seconds. The sound inaudible, but the motion clear. The latch gave. She pushed the gate open and stepped into the backyard. She had a flashlight in her other hand now, sweeping it across the windows, the sliding door, the AC unit mounted on the side of the house. Then she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. Multiple angles, close-ups of the door frame, wide shots of the yard. She moved deliberately, like someone conducting an inspection, except it was the middle of the night, and she was on private property without permission. The footage counter in the corner of the screen ticked upward. 1 minute, 2, 3. At 4 minutes and 17 seconds, she turned and walked back out the way she'd come. She didn't close the gate, just left it hanging open and disappeared into the darkness beyond the camera's range. My wife looked at me. Her face was calm, but her voice had an edge I recognized. "That's criminal trespassing. Potentially felony burglary if she had intent. How do we prove intent?" I asked. "She has tools. She took photos of private areas. She didn't need to enter the yard for any legitimate HOA purpose. That's the intent." I called 911. This time I was the one making the report. The dispatcher took my information, confirmed an officer would be en route, and told me not to approach the suspect if she was still on the property. I assured her Marla was gone. 20 minutes later, Officer Lyra Denning pulled up, the same officer who'd responded to Marla's calls about me. She looked less tired now, more focused. I met her at the door with a USB drive already prepared. "Mr. Voss," she said. I handed her the drive. 4 minutes, 17 seconds of footage. Time-stamped. GPS embedded. She used bolt cutters to open the gate and spent 4 minutes taking photos of my property at 2:30 in the morning. Officer Denning took the drive and reviewed the footage in her patrol car. I watched through the window as her expression changed. When she came back to the door, she was holding her notepad. "This is criminal trespassing at minimum. Given the time of night and the tools involved, it could escalate to attempted burglary. I'll need to file a full report. I want to press charges," I said. She nodded. "Understood. But I need to tell you, cases like this often end up in civil court rather than criminal prosecution, especially when it's neighbor disputes." My wife stepped forward then. She'd put on a jacket. In her hand was her state ID badge. "Officer, my name is Deputy Director of the Civil Rights Enforcement Division, State Attorney General's Office. I reside at this address. The intrusion you just witnessed occurred while I'm actively investigating this HOA for systemic abuse. That makes this obstruction of justice." Officer Denning stood straighter. "Ma'am, I'll escalate this to my supervisor immediately." She left to make calls. My wife and I stood in the doorway, watching the patrol car's lights reflect off the houses across the street. "This changes everything," I said. She nodded. "It was always going to come out. I just didn't think it would be like this." By 8 a.m., a county investigator had arrived. His name was Soren Vale, mid-40s, the kind of calm efficiency that came from years of working cases that actually mattered. "Ma'am," he said to my wife, "we're treating this as a credible threat to a state official. I'll need all documentation related to the ongoing dispute." I'd been waiting for this. I went to my office and came back with the black binder, 2 inches thick, tabbed sections, chronological order, 17 notices, email chains, inspection reports, camera footage logs. Inspector Vale opened it and started flipping through. His eyebrows went up. "You documented everything." "I'm an engineer," I said. "It's what I do." He took the binder, promised to return it within 48 hours, and left to interview Marla. By 10 a.m., the entire subdivision knew something had happened. Talia texted me. "Is it true your wife works for the state?" Gordon called. "I heard there's an investigator at Marla's house right now." I didn't confirm or deny, just said the situation was being handled through proper channels. The questions kept coming anyway. Neighbors I'd never spoken to suddenly appeared at my mailbox, walking their dogs past my house slower than usual, glancing toward the windows like they might catch a glimpse of something newsworthy. At 4 p.m., my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was Marla. The subject line read, "Urgent malicious allegations against your HOA board." I opened it. It had been sent to every resident in the subdivision. The body was 3 paragraphs of carefully worded outrage. "A resident has made false claims to law enforcement in retaliation for legitimate compliance enforcement. This is a coordinated attack on your elected leadership and the property values we all depend on. I urge every member of this community to stand with your board during this difficult time." She didn't use my name. Didn't need to. Everyone knew. 30 minutes later, Corin Eldridge sent a follow-up email. "The board stands united against these baseless accusations." I watched the emails pile up in my inbox. Some residents replied, all expressing support for Marla. A few others stayed silent. Then Gordon's reply came through. "I've reviewed the bylaws and the meeting minutes. There are significant procedural violations by the current board. I'm calling for an emergency membership vote per Section 3.8. The division in the community was becoming visible. No longer whispered, no longer hidden. At 6 p.m., Marla did something I didn't expect. She stood outside my house on the public sidewalk holding a handmade sign. Large block letters on white poster board. "Defend your community. Attend emergency meeting 7 p.m. Tonight." She didn't chant, didn't yell, just stood there holding the sign, turning slowly so passing cars could read it. I watched from the window, recorded it on my phone. Didn't go outside. Didn't engage, just documented. At 7 p.m., the community center filled up again. 60 people this time, more than the regular meeting. Gordon had organized it, requested it formally through the bylaws. But when the doors opened, Marla was there with someone I hadn't seen before. A man in his 50s wearing a suit that cost more than my car. He carried a leather briefcase and walked like someone who billed by the hour. Gordon leaned over and whispered, "That's Barrett Quinn, corporate attorney." She brought a lawyer. Quinn opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "My client has been subjected to coordinated harassment and false allegations designed to undermine her authority as duly elected president of this HOA. We're here to ensure due process." I stood up. Due process is exactly what we want, starting with an independent audit of all HOA finances and meeting records for the past 2 years. The room went quiet. Quinn looked at me. "That's an unfounded and inflammatory." The door at the back of the room opened. My wife walked in. She wasn't wearing casual clothes. She was in a suit, charcoal gray, state ID badge clipped to her lapel. Every person in the room turned. You could hear the shift, the intake of breath, the sudden understanding. She walked to the front and stood in the center aisle. "My name is Deputy Director of the Civil Rights Enforcement Division, Office of the State Attorney General. As of this morning, this homeowners association is under formal investigation for systemic abuse, financial misconduct, and harassment. All records are subject to a state subpoena. All meetings are subject to oversight. This gathering is suspended pending completion of the investigation." Complete silence. 3 seconds that felt like an hour. Marla stood slowly. Her face had gone pale. "You can't." "I can," my wife said. "And I have." The state subpoena arrived at Marla's house on a Wednesday morning. I didn't see it happen, but Talia did. She texted me a photo from her window. 2 sheriff's deputies at Marla's front door, one holding a manila envelope, the other carrying what looked like a banker's box. The subpoena demanded all HOA records, financial statements going back 3 years, meeting minutes, correspondence logs, email archives, everything. Marla refused to comply. Her lawyer, Barrett Quinn, filed a motion to quash the subpoena that same afternoon, claimed it violated the HOA's right to privacy of association. The motion was denied within 48 hours. The judge's order was 3 sentences long. Credible evidence of misconduct. The state has jurisdiction. Compliance is mandatory. On Friday, the deputies came back with a court order. This time, they didn't leave empty-handed. 4 boxes of documents, Marla's personal laptop, an external hard drive, and the clipboard. The famous clipboard with 3 layers of paper clipped to it, notes in blue ink, years of observations and violations recorded in Marla's tight handwriting. It was tagged as evidence item 12. I wasn't there to see her face when they took it, but I imagine it was the first time in years she'd been outside without it in her hands. The state auditors worked fast. Within a week, they'd found the first discrepancy. $34,780 in administrative fees were paid directly to Marla over 2 years. No bylaw authorization, no membership vote, just line items in the budget labeled administrative expenses, with Marla's name in the payee column. Then they found the second issue. $12,400 allocated to community improvement projects with no receipts, no photos, no documentation of what was actually improved, just expenditures marked complete with Marla's signature as approval. The third finding was worse. Marla had issued fines to 23 residents over 18 months. Total collected $47,000. Total deposited into the HOA account, $9,000. The rest had disappeared into a separate account that only Marla had access to. The auditors flagged it immediately. Potential embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, fraud. The numbers were clean. The pattern was clear. Marla had been using the HOA as a personal revenue stream. But it wasn't just the money. The email archives told another story. Messages between Marla and Corin show coordination to falsify meeting minutes, altering vote counts, adding agenda items that were never discussed, backdating approvals for fines that hadn't gone through proper procedure. One email stood out. Marla to Corin, dated 6 weeks earlier. "If we document enough violations, we can justify the lien. Once we have the lien, they'll either pay or sell. Either way, we control the outcome." The "they" in question was me and my wife. The strategy was spelled out in writing. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. State administrative hearing, open to the public. The community center wasn't big enough, so they held it in the county courthouse, 3rd floor conference room. 67 residents showed up, largest turnout in the subdivision's history. The panel sat at the front. 3 people. Director Nolan Crest from the Attorney General's office, Judge Halden Miles, administrative law, a state auditor whose name I didn't catch. Marla and Barrett Quinn sat at a table facing them. No podium, no microphone, just 2 chairs and a table at the same level as everyone else. For the first time since I'd met her, Marla didn't have a positional advantage. Director Crest opened the hearing with a statement. "This proceeding concerns credible allegations of financial misconduct, abuse of process, and systematic harassment conducted under color of HOA authority." He didn't read from notes. Didn't need to. The evidence had already been submitted. 40 pages of documentation, financial records, email chains, camera footage, testimony affidavits. He laid out the case in 15 minutes. $34,000 in unauthorized payments, $12,000 in undocumented expenditures, $38,000 in missing fine revenue, falsified meeting minutes, coordinated retaliation against residents who questioned board authority, criminal trespass captured on video. Then came the testimonies. Talia went first. She walked to the front, hands shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. Marla called code enforcement on me 9 times in 1 year. Every single inspection found nothing wrong, but I still had to take time off work, let strangers into my home, defend myself for planting roses. She looked directly at Marla when she said it. I stopped fighting because it was easier than living under constant scrutiny. That shouldn't be how a community works. Gordon went next. I requested financial records per the bylaws. Section 6.2 gives any member the right to review HOA finances. Marla refused. When I pressed the issue, she threatened me with a fine for disrupting board operations. That's not governance. That's intimidation. 3 other residents testified. Same pattern. Arbitrary enforcement. Retaliation for questioning authority. A system designed to punish rather than serve. Barrett Quinn tried to mount a defense, argued that vigorous enforcement wasn't the same as abuse. Those administrative errors weren't fraud. Marla had devoted countless hours to HOA duties and deserved compensation. But when the panel asked the critical question, the defense fell apart. Judge Miles leaned forward. Ms. Thorne, did the membership vote to authorize payment to you for administrative services? Marla hesitated, looked at Quinn. He whispered something. She turned back to the panel. I believed I was entitled to compensation for the time I invested. That's not what I asked, the judge said. Did the members vote? Silence. No, Marla finally said. But did the bylaws authorize self-payment by board members? Another pause. Not explicitly. The panel deliberated for 45 minutes in a closed session. When they returned, Director Crest read the findings. The HOA board dissolved effective immediately. Interim management is to be appointed by the state. Marla is banned from holding any HOA position for 5 years. Financial restitution of $47,180 to be repaid to the HOA within 90 days. Criminal referral to the district attorney's office for potential fraud charges pending further investigation. The words were clinical, procedural, but the impact was total. Marla sat motionless while the verdict was read. Her hands were flat on the table in front of her. No clipboard, no pen, no notes, just her hands, pale and still. When Director Crest finished, she stood. Barrett Quinn whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. She walked toward the exit. The room parted. 67 people shifted in their seats to let her pass. No one spoke. No one looked at her directly. She pushed through the door and disappeared into the hallway. I stayed until the room emptied. My wife was near the front, speaking quietly with Director Crest. I walked outside and found Marla standing next to her car in the parking lot. She was staring at her hands like she didn't recognize them. I stopped a few feet away. She looked up. Mr. Voss, she said. Her voice was hoarse. This isn't over. I didn't argue, didn't gloat, just looked at her with the same tiredness I'd felt for weeks. Yes, it is, I said quietly. You just don't know it yet. I turned and walked back toward the courthouse. Behind me, I heard a car door open and close. An engine starts, tires on pavement pulling away. When I looked back, the parking space was empty. 2 weeks after the hearing, the state appointed an interim manager. His name was Ven Avery, mid-50s, neutral, professional, with 20 years of experience managing HOAs in transition. His first action was an email to every resident. Subject line, transparency and accountability. The body was short. Full financial audit results attached. Meeting minutes archive available online. Contact information listed. Office hours are every Tuesday and Thursday. No exceptions. You deserve to know how your community is run, the email said. That starts now. The first meeting under Ven's management was different from anything I'd seen before. No podium at the front of the room. Instead, tables are arranged in a circle. 54 residents showed up, the highest attendance on record. Ven sat at one of the tables like everyone else, a laptop open in front of him. No gavel in sight. He started with a moment of silence. No one had suggested it. It just happened. 60 seconds of quiet, while everyone processed what the past 2 months had been. Then Ven spoke. "This is your community," he said. "Not mine, not the board's, yours. So let's talk about what you want to change." Talia raised her hand first. "I want a formal appeals process. If someone gets a violation notice, they should be able to challenge it before any fine is issued, with a neutral third party reviewing the evidence." Ven made a note. "That's reasonable. We can draft language for that." Gordon spoke next. "I want monthly financial reports, public, posted online where anyone can see them. No more mystery budgets." Another note. "Agreed." A woman I didn't recognize, Lena Morell from the east side of the subdivision, stood up. "I want term limits. No one should be on the board for more than 4 years. Power shouldn't be permanent." The suggestions kept coming. Violation notices require photographic evidence with timestamps. 7-day response window instead of 72 hours. Quarterly community input sessions. A ban on using emergency services for non-emergency disputes, with automatic removal from the board as a penalty for violations. Ven typed everything into his laptop, projected onto a screen so everyone could see the list growing in real time. No pushback, no dismissals, just documentation of what the community actually wanted. 3 weeks later, the proposed bylaw amendments were distributed. 12 pages of changes. Every suggestion from the meeting was incorporated. A vote was scheduled for the following month. Turnout was 87%. The amendments passed with 91% approval. The new bylaws went into effect immediately. Appeals process with neutral arbitration. Monthly financials are posted online by the 5th of each month. Board term limits of 4 years maximum. Violation notices require photo evidence and 7-day response periods. Emergency services misuse resulting in immediate board removal. It was all there, in writing, enforceable. Elections were held 6 weeks later. Gordon ran for president, won by a landslide. Talia ran for treasurer, also won. The new board had 5 members, all with different backgrounds, all committed to the idea that an HOA should serve rather than rule. Their first meeting was public, live-streamed. The agenda was posted a week in advance. When Gordon opened the meeting, he did it without a gavel. Just a simple statement. "We're here to listen. Let's get started." On Memorial Day weekend, someone organized a community barbecue, first one in over a year. It wasn't official. No HOA sponsorship. Just neighbors who wanted to see each other without tension. My wife and I went. She brought potato salad. I brought ribs. We set up at one of the picnic tables near the pool and watched as families arrived. Kids ran around with sparklers, even though it wasn't quite dark yet. Someone brought a speaker and played music that was too loud, but no one complained. Talia came over and sat down. "This feels normal," she said. "Like how it's supposed to be." My wife smiled. "It is normal. We just forgot for a while." Gordon stopped by with a plate of burgers. "You know," he said, looking at me. "I was terrified of Marla for 3 years. Let her push me around because it seemed easier than fighting. I won't do that again." I nodded. "You stood up when it mattered. That's what counts." He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. Just nodded and walked back to the grill. Around us, the subdivision was alive. Conversations. Laughter. The sound of people who weren't afraid of their own community anymore. As the sun set, my wife and I walked home. The streets were quiet but not empty. A few neighbors were out watering lawns, walking dogs, and sitting on porches. Normal things. Safe things. We got to our front door, and I unlocked it without thinking about who might be watching. Inside, the house felt lighter somehow, like pressure had been released from the walls. I checked the camera footage out of habit. The day's recordings showed nothing unusual, just people living their lives. But when I scrolled back to the what morning, 6:45 a.m., there was something. A gray sedan I didn't recognize parked at the end of the street. It sat there for 4 minutes. Engine off, no one getting out. Then it drove away. I watched the clip twice. Couldn't see the license plate clearly. It could have been nothing. Could have been someone lost. Checking an address. Waiting for a phone call. I saved the footage anyway. Labeled it Monitor. Old habits. My wife came into the office. "Everything okay?" she asked. I closed the laptop. "Yeah," I said. "Just checking." She looked at me for a moment, reading something in my expression. "It's over. Alden. She's gone. The system worked." I nodded. She was right. The system had worked. Marla was banned from the HOA. The board was reformed. The bylaws were solid. Everything was documented and transparent. It was over. I believed that. But I also kept the footage, just in case. 3 months after the hearing, I was scrolling through local news on my phone during lunch when I saw the headline, "Former HOA President pleads no contest to misdemeanor fraud." The article was short, 4 paragraphs. Marla Thorne had accepted a plea agreement. No jail time. The charges had been reduced from felony to misdemeanor in exchange for full restitution, 2 years probation, and 120 hours of community service. The DA's office cited her lack of prior criminal history and cooperation with the investigation. The article mentioned she'd sold her house and relocated out of state. No forwarding address provided. I read it twice. Felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a sense of something closing. A chapter ending not with drama, but with paperwork and legal procedure. Exactly the way it should. My wife came into the kitchen and saw me staring at the screen. "You saw," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Do you feel like it's fair?" she asked. I thought about it. "I feel like it's finished," I said. That's enough. The HOA had found its rhythm under the new board. Gordon ran meetings with efficiency but without ego. Agendas are posted 7 days in advance. Financial reports are published on the 5th of every month like clockwork. Talia managed the budget with transparency I hadn't seen in any organization, let alone a neighborhood association. Every line item is documented. Every expenditure is justified. When someone questioned a landscaping cost at the monthly meeting, she pulled up receipts on her laptop and walked through the numbers in real time. No defensiveness, no accusations, just information. The community garden project launched in early spring. Residents voted on the location, the northeast corner of the common area, where sunlight hit for most of the day. 20 families signed up to participate. They built raised beds together on a Saturday morning, kids running between the plots, while adults measured lumber and mixed soil. I helped for a couple of hours, mostly holding boards steady while Gordon's son drove screws. It felt normal, purposeful, the kind of thing neighbors did when they weren't busy defending themselves. Attendance at HOA meetings stabilized around 40 residents per month, high by historical standards but no longer driven by crisis. People came because they wanted to know what was happening, not because they were afraid of what might happen to them. The meetings had childcare now, a detail Talia had pushed for. "If we want participation, we need to make it possible," she'd said. It worked. Parents brought the kids. The kids played in the next room. Adults talked about stormwater management and landscaping contracts without the tension that used to fill every conversation. One evening, my wife asked me a question I'd been avoiding. We were sitting on the back porch, the same porch Marla had photographed at 2:30 in the morning months earlier. The memory was still there, but it had lost its weight. "Do you regret fighting back?" she asked. I watched the sun drop below the fence line, orange light filtering through the trees. "There were nights I couldn't sleep," I said. "Nights. I checked the cameras 5 times before bed. Mornings. I woke up wondering what new notice would be waiting. I thought about giving up more than once, just moving, starting over somewhere else where no one cared about lawn height or wreath diameter." "But you didn't?" she said. "No," I said, because giving up meant she'd do it to someone else. Talia, Gordon, whoever moved in after us. The cost of fighting was high, but the cost of not fighting was worse. And I had something most people don't. "What's that?" "Documentation," I said. "And you?" She smiled, took my hand. "The system worked because you made it work. You gave it something to work with. Most people don't do that. They just endure." I nodded. "Truth doesn't need to be loud," I said. "It just needs to be recorded." Later that week, I was cleaning out the garage and found something I'd forgotten about. An old clipboard, the kind with a metal clamp at the top. paint flecked and worn at the edges. It wasn't Marla's. It was mine. I'd used it years ago for tracking lawn maintenance schedules, back before any of this started. Before clipboards meant surveillance and control. I stood there holding it, feeling the weight of association it had taken on. Then I walked it to the recycling bin and dropped it in. The sound it made hitting the bottom was final. I didn't need it anymore. 6 months after the investigation closed, I received a package from the county sheriff's office. Inside was a USB drive and a note from investigator Soren Vale. Case closed. Evidence returned per protocol. Thank you for your cooperation. I plugged the drive into my computer. It contained everything: camera footage, email chains, the timeline spreadsheet I'd built, scanned copies of all 17 notices. At the bottom of the file directory was a text document labeled Evidence Log. I opened it. Item 12 was listed near the end. Clipboard, wooden, blue ink annotations. Retained for training purposes. I smiled at that. Marla's clipboard, the instrument of her authority, is now used to teach law enforcement officers about HOA abuse patterns. There was poetry in it. I scrolled through the files one more time, then deleted them from my computer. I didn't need them anymore. The story was over. But before I emptied the trash, I created a new document, called it Lessons Learned. Inside, I wrote 5 lines. Document everything. Know your rights. Don't fight emotion with emotion. Fight with facts. Systems work when you make them work. Standing up is exhausting, but silence is worse. I saved the file. Sent copies to Gordon, Talia, and a few other residents who'd asked how I'd managed to build such a comprehensive case. The subject line was simple: "For next time, if there is one." No one replied immediately, but over the next week, the file was forwarded, shared, saved. A new resident who'd just moved into the subdivision sent me a message. "I heard what happened here. Thank you for making it safe to move in." I didn't reply, just archived the email. The work was done. The community could take care of itself now. On a Sunday morning, I stood in the front yard, watering the grass. The lawn was 3.1 inches tall. No one was measuring. A neighbor walked past with her dog and waved. I waved back. Kids rode bikes down the street, their laughter cutting through the quiet. The sun was warm. The air smelled like cut grass and summer. Everything looked normal, because it was normal. I glanced at the camera mounted under the eave. Still there, still recording. I'd thought about taking it down, but decided against it. Not because I expected trouble, just because some lessons stay with you. Peace doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering why you fought for it in the first place. I turned off the hose and went inside. If this story reminded you that silence costs more than speaking up, you're not alone. Thousands of people face the same choice every day. Stay quiet and hope it stops, or document everything and make the system work. The difference is evidence. The difference is knowing you're not the only one who's been there. If you've ever dealt with someone who mistakes power for authority, drop a comment below and share what happened. Your story matters. It helps someone else realize they're not alone, and that fighting back the right way actually works. Subscribe to Karma Fence for more true stories about people who stood their ground, built their case, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. And if this one hit home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the best defense against abuse of power isn't silence. It's a timestamp, a receipt, and the refusal to let someone rewrite your story.